In the suffocating darkness of forbidden archives, where dust motes dance like trapped souls, lie texts so dangerous that they have been banned, hidden, and whispered about for millennia. What you are about to discover will shatter every comfortable assumption you hold about the legendary King Solomon, for beneath the veneer of divine wisdom lurks a terrifying truth that religious authorities have desperately tried to bury. Solomon did not merely commune with God, he enslaved demons. The Testament of Solomon, banned from biblical canon, reveals a king who descended into shadow magic so profound that it would ultimately consume him. Tonight, we explore the 72 demons Solomon bound, the banned psalms deemed too dangerous for human consumption, and witness how absolute power corrupted the wisest king who ever lived. The ring that gave Solomon dominion over demons still exists, hidden in vaults that few dare approach. The seals he used to bind entities of pure chaos remain etched in manuscripts scholars refuse to translate fully. The rituals he performed, combining divine authority with infernal knowledge, created a hybrid magic so potent that its very existence threatens the foundations of established religion. This is the story they do not want you to hear. This is how Solomon enslaved demons, and how those demons, in the end, enslaved him. Chapter 1, The Ring of Binding. The supernatural assault began at sunset when the demon Orniaz marked a young temple worker as prey. This youth, whose skill with stone and timber exceeded all others, had become the focal point of something ancient and hungry. Night after night, the creature would manifest at twilight's edge, siphoning the boy's wages, his food, his very life force, with methodical precision. The demon's feeding ritual was grotesquely intimate. Ornias would seize the young man's right hand and suck upon his thumb, drawing out his essence like marrow from bone. But this was no random predation. The demon siphoned exactly half of everything. Half the boy's wages, half his food, half his strength, leaving just enough to keep the victim alive for the next feeding. The boy grew gaunt, his eyes becoming hollow wells, his once powerful frame withering under this supernatural parasitism. When Solomon learned of this horror plaguing his construction site, his response revealed the darkness already growing within his heart. Rather than seek purification through prayer, he chose a path that other men feared to contemplate. He entered the temple's inner sanctum alone, surrounded by shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent consciousness, and made a bargain that would echo through eternity. For 7 days and nights, Solomon fasted, his prayers growing increasingly desperate, increasingly willing to cross lines that separated the sacred from the profane. He called upon powers that dwelt in the spaces between light and shadow, entities that existed before the foundation of the world. His voice grew hoarse from incantations that tasted of copper and ash, words that made the very stones of the temple tremble with unnatural resonance. On the 7th night, as Solomon knelt bleeding from self-inflicted wounds that spelled out binding symbols across his flesh, the air itself began to burn. The archangel Michael descended not in gentle glory, but as a figure of terrible judgment, his presence filling the chamber with the smell of burning bronze and ozone. His wings cast shadows that moved independently of his form, creating geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Michael presented Solomon with an object that would forever alter the balance between heaven and hell. A ring forged from brass and iron in the fires of divine wrath. The pentagram etched into its surface was not merely decorative, but functional, a geometric pattern that could bind entities of pure chaos to the wearer's will. Around its circumference, the ineffable name of God was carved in letters that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed peripherally. "Take this ring and mark the demon Ornias," Michael commanded, his voice like the grinding of cosmic machinery. "When he comes, cast this ring at his chest, saying, 'In the name of God, King Solomon calls thee hither. At once he will come obedient to you, and by means of him you shall build the temple of God.'" But there's something else in the angel's tone. Something that spoke of prices yet to be paid, of bargains that would echo through eternity. The ring was not merely a tool of binding, but a gateway, a bridge between the realm of divine authority and the abyss itself. In accepting it, Solomon was accepting responsibility for knowledge that would transform him into something neither fully human nor entirely divine. When Ornias next appeared to feed upon the young worker, Solomon was waiting in the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. The demon materialized as a column of writhing flame, its form constantly shifting between man and beast, between shadow and substance. Its eyes were voids that seemed to contain the accumulated screams of every soul it had devoured across millennia of existence. The creature's very presence made reality bend and warp around it. The air grew thick and difficult to breathe, filled with the stench of sulfur and decay. Shadows deepened unnaturally, reaching toward the demon like grasping fingers. The young worker collapsed unconscious, his body unable to withstand proximity to such concentrated malevolence. "Why have you summoned me, O King Solomon?" Ornias demanded, its voice, the sound of children weeping in empty rooms, of mothers mourning stillborn infants, of civilizations breathing their last breath. The demon towered above Solomon like a pillar of living nightmare, its form crackling with energies that predated creation itself. But Solomon stood firm, the ring upon his finger pulsing with unholy light that cast writhing shadows on the chamber walls. He spoke the binding words that Michael had taught him, syllables that tasted of copper and ash upon his tongue, phonemes that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Ornias shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, like glass shattering, like the very foundations of hell cracking under divine pressure. The demon's mighty form collapsed, folding in upon itself, as forces beyond its comprehension wrapped around it, like chains forged from crystallized law. It fell prostrate before the king, its supernatural strength reduced to nothing by the power of the ring. "I am compelled," the demon hissed, its voice now reduced to a whisper filled with equal measures of rage and terror. "The seal burns my essence, the name binds my will. I, who have devoured the strength of 1,000 mortals across 10,000 years, am now slave to one who bears the mark of the Most High." Thus began Solomon's descent into the darkest corners of supernatural knowledge. The first demon was bound, but it would not be the last. Far from it. Ornias itself would become Solomon's herald, compelling other entities to appear before the king's throne through a chain of supernatural command that stretched down into the deepest pits of hell. The temple construction would indeed be completed with supernatural aid, but at a cost that would echo through the ages. For in binding demons to his service, Solomon had opened a door that could never be fully closed. He had tasted power beyond mortal comprehension, and like all who sup at such tables, he would find the feast impossible to abandon. The ring grew heavier upon his finger, with each demon bound, not in physical weight, but in spiritual burden. Each entity enslaved added another layer of corruption to his soul, another whisper of temptation in his ear. The young king who had asked only for wisdom was becoming something else entirely, something that existed in the space between heaven and hell, belonging fully to neither realm, yet wielding the terrible authority of both. Chapter 2. The Testament of Terror. Solomon's throne room became a chamber of horrors where 72 demons were systematically bound to his service. Each entity was a master of specific forms of human suffering and cosmic chaos. Beelzebul arrived with thunder that shook the palace foundations, manifesting as a towering figure wreathed in storm clouds. "I am the prince of demons," he declared. "I destroy kingdoms through whispered doubt. I turn friend against friend with manufactured jealousy. I am the voice that drives kings to madness in their midnight hours." Even this lord of chaos was compelled to bow before Solomon's ring, the seal burning like a divine brand upon the demon's ethereal flesh. The sight of Beelzebul's submission sent shockwaves through the infernal hierarchy. Asmodeus appeared next, the demon of lust, whose form was man from the waist up, but serpent below. His 3 heads spoke in unison. "My office is to plot against the newly wedded, to separate them through carefully planted seeds of jealousy and mistrust. I bring about divorces that destroy families for generations, creating cycles of broken homes and abandoned children." The demon revealed specific details about his methods. Asmodeus could enter bedchambers through the smallest crack, whispering suggestions that lovers believed were their own thoughts. He could make faithful spouses see infidelity where none existed, turning innocent conversations into evidence of betrayal. Furfur materialized as a heart with fiery tail, speaking through crackling flames until forced into human form. I create storms that destroy ships carrying wedding gifts. He admitted, I speak in tongues of fire that men mistake for divine inspiration, leading prophets to pronounce false judgments upon marriage bonds. The demon of stone-cutting appeared as living granite, revealing how supernatural servants assisted in temple construction. I can split mountains with a gesture, but I prefer to split families, communities, entire nations. Stone may heal given time, but the fractures I create in human hearts last for generations. Most terrifying was the demon of depression, shrouded in gray mist, its face a perfect void that reflected every failure the viewer had experienced. I crush spirits more thoroughly than any physical torment could achieve. It whispered, I make men believe that darkness is the only truth, that suffering is their natural state. I am the voice that whispers give up when dawn is closest. Each demon revealed specific weaknesses when compelled to speak truth, creating a supernatural manual of binding and banishment. Solomon used this knowledge to bind the most dangerous entities in vessels of brass and bronze, sealing them with his ring. But with each interrogation, Solomon himself changed. The knowledge came at the cost of innocence, transforming worship into spellcasting as he grew ever more like the entities he bound. Chapter 3. The Forbidden Psalms. Hidden beneath ecclesiastical censorship lie 18 texts so dangerous they were excised from biblical canon like infected tissue. The Psalms of Solomon, dating to the 1st century before Christ, contain prayers that blur the line between worship and witchcraft. These banned psalms emerged from blood-soaked Jerusalem in 63 before Christ, when Roman legions shattered the holy city's gates. The authors witnessed horrors that drove them beyond Orthodox faith, seeking divine intervention through means traditional Judaism could never sanction. Psalm 2 paints supernatural vengeance. The lawless one laid waste our land so that no one inhabited it. He destroyed young and old and their children at the same time. But this continues with imagery transcending military conquest, describing spiritual forces sweeping across earth like plague winds, carrying damnation's stench. Psalm 17 contains the most explicit messianic prophecy ever written, describing a figure who will purge Jerusalem and make it holy as it was from the beginning. But this purging involves wholesale slaughter on an unprecedented scale. Streets will run red with blood, and screams will echo from valley to mountaintop. This Messiah will shatter unrighteous rulers with a rod of iron, forged from meteoric metal and inscribed with names that burn the tongue to speak. The psalm describes supernatural abilities that read like divine warfare instructions. The coming king will command demons and angels, control storms and earthquakes with gestures, speak words that kill or resurrect the dead, and judge hearts with perfect accuracy that leaves no sin hidden. The nations shall come from the ends of the earth to see his glory, but their coming is compelled worship, drawn by supernatural magnetism, impossible to resist. This figure will remake human nature itself, stripping free will from those opposing divine order. Psalm 9 ventures into uncomfortable territory. Detailed mechanics of divine judgment. Where canonical texts speak vaguely of afterlife rewards, this provides a technical manual for spiritual warfare, resembling supernatural torture instructions. Most troubling is Psalm 13, containing an actual invocation ritual disguised as prayer. The text provides specific instructions for calling upon angelic forces, complete with proper pronunciation of divine names and correct positioning during ritual. At midnight, when the veil between worlds grows thin, the psalm instructs with magical precision, "Let the righteous call upon the name that is above every name." The psalm then provides those words in transliterated Hebrew that burns the eyes when read directly and causes physical pain to speak aloud. The psalm describes how properly performed this ritual causes angels to manifest physically as figures of terrible beauty whose presence makes the air ring like struck metal. These angels will carry out whatever vengeance the righteous desire, limited only by imagination and hatred depth. These texts represent monotheistic faith's shadow side, recognizing that if God possesses infinite power, faithful servants should access supernatural abilities transcending mortal limitations. Orthodox religion has always feared this logical conclusion, for it transforms worship from submission into collaboration, prayer into spellcasting. Chapter 4. The Price of Dark Wisdom. Solomon's decline reads like a supernatural tragedy, a cautionary tale about inevitable corruption from trafficking with forces beyond human comprehension. The king who began asking humbly for wisdom ended as something barely recognizable as human. The transformation began subtly. Solomon's wisdom became tinged with knowledge mortal minds were never meant to possess. The demons whispered constantly through dreams and visions that invaded his sleep like parasites, filling his nights with visions of power beyond imagination. Each enslaved demon brought its own contamination. Asmodeus whispered of pleasures requiring consumption of substances that degraded body and soul. The demon of pride showed visions of reshaping reality itself, becoming a god king whose will would remake existence's laws. The 700 wives and 300 concubines were not political marriages, but components in a vast supernatural experiment. Each woman was chosen for specific bloodlines and spiritual attributes, enhancing Solomon's magical workings. Foreign wives brought forbidden knowledge and mystery religions involving blood sacrifice and communion with darkness. The temples to foreign gods were not diplomatic gestures, but functional magical architecture designed according to demon specifications. Each temple served as focusing lenses for supernatural forces. The temple to Moloch was a functioning gateway where entities from beyond could manifest physically. Solomon's legendary wealth became damnation's instrument. Gold, silver, precious stones were gathered for supernatural properties. Certain metals, when alloyed in specific proportions during particular astrological configurations, could hold spiritual forces, like batteries store energy. The Queen of Sheba's visit was a terrifying encounter between supernatural practitioners. She came not to test wisdom with riddles, but to engage in magical combat. Her retinue included more than human servants, entities that materialized as translucent figures flickering in and out of visibility. When she and Solomon met, the palace architecture groaned under competing supernatural forces. Their verbal sparring was simultaneously intellectual battle and magical duel, each question carrying layers of binding and banishment that could tear apart reality. The queen's acknowledgement of Solomon's superiority was genuine supernatural submission. The breaking point came during Solomon's 57th year, when he attempted binding an entity so powerful its true name could not be spoken without reality unraveling. The ritual required sacrifices crossing lines even Solomon's corrupted conscience had respected. When the entity manifested, its presence transformed the throne room into hell's mouth. Walls bled, floors cracked, revealing endless depths of writhing shadows. Air thickened with consumed souls' screams. But the entity would not be bound. It looked upon Solomon with amusement. "You think to command me, mortal king? You who have made yourself slave to my lesser servants? I am the shadow your soul casts, the darkness your wisdom birthed. You cannot bind what you have become." Solomon realized he had slowly become demonic himself. The supernatural knowledge, power wielded, lines crossed, had transformed him into something between human and demon, belonging to neither realm. The entity departed without being bound, leaving a broken king understanding his bargain's true nature. Every demon enslaved had taken a piece of his humanity. Every supernatural victory cost something essential that could never be recovered. Solomon's final years were desperate attempts to reclaim lost humanity. He destroyed magical implements, scattered bound demons, and tried purification rituals that left him weak and hollow. But corruption had gone too deep. Solomon died not as the wise king of legend, but as something caught between worlds, his soul claimed by neither heaven nor hell, but doomed to wander spaces between, forever seeking redemption that would never come. The wisest king who ever lived became the most cautionary tale ever told, a reminder that even divine gifts can become instruments of damnation when wielded by hearts that have forgotten their own humanity, a physical blow that drove him to his knees. In binding demons to his service, he had slowly, inexorably, become demonic himself. The supernatural knowledge he had accumulated, the power he had wielded, the lines he had crossed, had transformed him into something that existed between human and demon, belonging fully to neither realm, yet wielding the terrible authority of both. The entity laughed, a sound like civilizations dying, like stars burning out, like the universe itself breathing its last breath. It departed without being bound or banished, leaving behind a broken king who finally understood the true nature of the bargain he had made. Every demon he had enslaved had taken a piece of his humanity in return. Every supernatural victory had cost him something essential that could never be recovered. Solomon's final years were spent in desperate attempts to undo what he had done, to find some way to reclaim his lost humanity. He destroyed the magical implements he had created, scattered the demons he had bound, and tried to purge himself through rituals of purification that left him weak and hollow. But it was too late. The corruption had gone too deep. The transformation was too complete. Solomon died not as the wise king of legend, but as something caught between worlds, his soul claimed by neither heaven nor hell, but doomed to wander in the spaces between, forever seeking redemption that would never come. The wisest king who ever lived became the most cautionary tale ever told, a reminder that even divine gifts can become instruments of damnation when wielded by hearts that have forgotten their own humanity. D. Leaving a broken king understanding his bargain's true nature. Every demon enslaved had taken a piece of his humanity. Every supernatural victory cost something essential that could never be recovered. Solomon's final years were desperate attempts to undo his transformation, to reclaim lost humanity. But corruption had gone too deep. Solomon died not as the wise king of legend, but as something caught between worlds, his soul claimed by neither heaven nor hell, but doomed to wander spaces between, forever seeking redemption that would never come.